Hey, everybody. Welcome to Pianist Academy. I'm Szczepanek. I see we have Rootsie in the house already, and Rob. Welcome to both of you. There are a couple more people here, so please feel free to say hello in the chat. Love to know who else is tuning in. If you had a chance to read the description of today's stream, this is a completely open Q&A session. There are no submissions, nothing else to talk about except whatever you want to. So, Nancy, hello, good morning. Hello, David. Welcome, welcome. How is everybody doing? I'll give you, while you think about some questions and say hello, I'll give you a quick update, a little bit of what's going on here. There's some, I'm excited about a couple of videos coming out on the channel over the next couple weeks. There is one new one coming up Friday. I don't want to give too much away because it's a bit of a surprise. But there's a new video coming up Friday, and there'll actually be one the week after that as well. It'll be two weeks in a row. I don't do that often here anymore, but 2 weeks in a row. And next week, I have a pretty exciting filming week lined up. I'm working with a virtual instrument company, and the owner of the company is flying out to my studio here to do some filming. I can't release any more information about that yet. But if you are fans of virtual instruments and you use virtual instruments in your practice or at other times, we'll have plenty of fun things to talk about once this new product comes out soon. All right. Well, I've heard from Rootsie and Rob and Nancy and David. Anybody else here that wants to say hi? And for those of you that have chimed in the chat, what would you like to talk about today? There are so many. It could be something that you're working on. It could be just a general question. I could come up with something just to generally talk about that I think would help everybody. But totally open. Who's going to be first? I wish I could see, I think I've mentioned this on the chat before, on the streams before, but I wish I could see, you know, when you're chatting with somebody on a phone, the little 3 dots come up. That's always nice. Otherwise, I have no idea if someone's writing or not. David, you say you have a jazz question. Kathy, hello, Kathy. David, you say, are there rules or guidelines for when to push or pull, or is it all interpretation and feel? I think that's even a bigger question, a more broad question than just jazz. In jazz in particular, I don't think about pushing very often in jazz. It really depends on the style of the tune. Maybe in something like a bebop kind of thing, or something else that has a lot of movement. There might be some occasions, like in a solo, to push. Pulling in jazz, that is, I think, much more common, where a lot of jazz is played in a really relaxed way and really on the back of the beat. If you're playing by yourself and it's just solo piano, if you lean to the back of the beat, you're always going to be in a good spot, and people are going to enjoy that. It's going to sound way better to a casual listener than if you're accidentally rushing. And it's even going to sound more pleasing and relaxing than if you're just right on the middle of the beat. We can dive into that a little bit more if people want to talk about the front, the middle, and the back of the beat. We can definitely talk about that. In classical music, probably the rules are the same between classical music and jazz as far as rubato. We don't really use that word in jazz, but in classical music, rubato is the give and take of time. Yeah, Rob, I'll come back to that for sure. So giving and taking time, great rubato and great giving and taking time, showing phrase, all of that, being musical, it's all done in equal measure. So there are a lot of opportunities to do different things in music, and that's one of the great things about it. So rules, the rule is, I guess, the general rule is when you take time, you have to give it back. And you have to give it back in an appropriate amount to what you took, right? And when the vice versa, when you take time away and a retard, then you have to give it back. That's the first thing that comes to mind about rules for push and pull. Often in classical music, I see and hear students that if we don't have a really great grasp of rubato and how to implement it really well, it doesn't feel balanced. And usually people aren't sure why it doesn't feel balanced. And it has to do with that perception of time and how much time we took and how much we need to give back and where that happens. I could probably give some examples of that. But hello, OCD King. And I'm going to jump over to a little bit of Rob's question, and then maybe I can revisit this and we can talk a little bit about, I can show some bad rubato in a phrase or in a small section of a piece, and then talk about maybe a couple different ways that we can implement good rubato. Let's see here. I have a little bit of my arrangement of Mission Impossible pulled up on my iPad, so we'll just use that. That's kind of in a jazz vein. I won't show the sheet music unless people really want to. Isabel, welcome. I will come back to your question in just a second. But let's talk a little bit about front, middle, back of the beat. And I'm going to put a metronome on. Hopefully, we can all hear this. Okay, let's just talk about, I'm going to play a left hand. It's a single note part. It's really simple, so we can really hear what part of the beat things are landing on. I'm going to start by playing something straight. So that's right in the middle of the beat. I'll add an octave in case the metronome's too loud. If I push to the front of the beat, I'm not going to take the tempo faster, but I'm just going to feel like I'm playing slightly in front. That's usually not a direction that we go. You can hear it's a little consistent even in my playing. Now let's talk about the back of the beat. The playing is just, and the differences are milliseconds, probably a handful of milliseconds, from being right on the middle of the beat to being in front of the beat, which sounds a little jarring. It sounds rushed. It doesn't sound settled. And it's different than, and a cello rondo would be staying in the middle of the beat, getting faster progressively, but where the beat gets faster, and it's supposed to. But being in front of the beat just sounds like, usually it sounds like we're not, jazzers would say, in the pocket. We're not feeling the groove very well. The back of the beat shifts that a couple milliseconds in the other direction. And I would say first, you have to be able to play right in the middle of the beat in order to try to even feel shifts. And you got to be able to play right in the middle of the beat, beat after beat after beat, bar after bar after bar. So can we, whatever you're working on, simple thing. Let me add, play every quarter note. I'm just kind of moving around G minor here. Those are all in the middle of the beat. Rob, I don't know if that answers a little bit of that question. It's a very difficult thing to get into your playing and to really understand until we can feel that really precise pulse. Hello, Calais and Miguel. Hello. Let me play a little bit of where I was. And I'll play it without the metronome first. And I'm going to attempt to do a lot of playing on the back of the beat first. And then I'm going to shift and do the opposite. I'm going to play in front. So here we go. Okay, all of that sounds nice. It's in the pocket. It grooves. It flows. It's good. It's still kind of exciting. Here would be in front of the beat, so kind of rushing without speeding the tempo up. That would still be the same, approximately the same beats per minute. Maybe I took it one or two faster. But I think you can hear that there's a big difference between how settled the first felt and how pushed in not a musical way the second one feels. Cool. C drive, welcome. Great. Yeah, I think that's a cool thing. Let me talk to Isabel for a second. Yeah, David, exactly. You said it feels rushed and not laid back. Exactly. And the ironic thing is it can feel that way without the metronome marking really being different. It's just because there's too much anticipation of where the beat happens. Yeah. Let me jump over to Isabel's question. And then if we have time and we don't have another question come in, I can revisit a little bit of this topic and we can look at a classical example of rubato, push and pull, and some that's done tastefully. We can dive into details of what that is and something that's not. Isabel, first, your question. You say you're suffering from tendinitis in both of your thumbs for months. Any tips to get rid of tendinitis? Oh, Isabel, first, have you talked to a physical therapist or a doctor of some kind? Do you know what the root cause of the tendinitis is in the first place? Is it from doing something at the piano? Or is it from some other daily activity? I have a student I see weekly, for example, that plays tennis. She plays quite a bit of tennis. And sometimes she comes into lessons and she's got strange pain in sometimes a wrist, an elbow, usually in the right hand. She's right-handed. In those cases, we have to talk about like what's going on in her other activity, tennis, and how is it affecting what she does at the piano, and make sure that the way she's feeling and if there's pain associated, that we're not doing something bad at the piano to compensate for the pain that we feel for another reason. But then secondly, she also knows that root cause. So she knows she has to go back, work on a couple things in tennis in particular. Isabel, you say because of piano that you learn by yourself. And Kale, I love your comment here. Kale says get a referral for an OT. You have carpal tunnel and you're going to an OT, and luckily it doesn't affect your piano playing. But exercises, that's an occupational therapist. Isabel, I would say the same thing. Definitely see a body professional about that. Now, in piano playing, there are a couple of general things that we can look at just to make sure that we're not doing anything that's aggravating the thumbs in particular. Two really, really common things that I see. I'm going to use the top-down camera to show you. One is a thumb that sticks out like this all the time and is really bent this way. So, and kind of holds there throughout all kinds of playing. And the thumb is in like this looks like a permanently extended position. I see that from beginner and intermediate students. And then I also see the reverse, which is this part of the thumb really pulled out and under tension, but then the tip of the thumb, the last joint, curled back in. That could also possibly cause tendinitis and cause other issues, because I don't know if you can see this on the camera, but keeping my hand in this position, it's actually shaking. It's trembling a little bit because the fingers are under so much tension, especially the thumb side here. So what we want, we go back here, take your right hand, shake it out, let it fall to your side, because everybody's hand is built a little different. Some people tend to normally have more bend in the thumb, and other people have a thumb that sticks out naturally. So what we want to do is shake the hand out and see what it actually looks like when it's fully at rest and not being engaged to do anything at the keyboard. So from the bench, shake it out. You can just put it back on the keys, not trying to play any notes. So I'll show you that. My hand position is right there. If I turn it a little bit so you can see my thumb, it's pretty straight. There's a little bit of a curve, but not much. That's my natural thumb position, natural hand position. That's how I strive to play everything. At this point in my life, I don't have a problem with that or this anymore, but I definitely used to have a problem with the thumb kind of being stuck to the side like this. So that is something you could check out in both hands, Isabel, and see if something like that's happening. And if it happens while you start to play, if it happens immediately as soon as the thumb gets used, we would want to try to really pare down our playing to the point where we can activate the thumb, especially just the thumb to start with. We can activate it without making it do one of those two things. So we don't want either of those happening. And you can, every time you feel that or you see a tension like that, if you're encountering this problem, every time that happens, take your hand off, shake it out at your side, and bring it back to the keyboard and take a look at where it is again. This might happen at the beginning of going through something like this. You might have to do that every 10 seconds, every 20 seconds, just to remind yourself this is what it's supposed to be. Yes. So Isabel, those are the first places I'd look for thumbs in both hands. A lot of times tendinitis is due to overuse in an unnatural way, or in a way that the hand isn't built to accommodate. Playing the piano, we should always be striving to this sounds funny, and it's very simple. And the famous pedagogue Newhouse said, any 4-year-old can play the piano. They have enough development in the body, they have enough strength. Maybe the coordination is a little lacking, but the body itself is perfect for a 4-year-old to play the piano. And I think we can learn from that. And that, when someone is that young, they don't yet know how to create tension in their body. They haven't experienced stress and other things that cause us to end up carrying ourselves around on a daily basis in a way that is not as healthy, right? Young kids, they don't have that experience. They don't know that. So they tend to do things in a very natural, healthy way until they learn something about stress, and that changes them. Kali, that's a great question. I'm going to come back to that. So Isabel, those are my comments for you today about thumbs in particular. Just keep shaking them out, bring them back to the piano, make sure that they're not sticking out and not too curled in with this part of the thumb very, very engaged. And secondly, yes, see an OT or a physical therapist, occupational therapist or physical therapist. They should have some exercises to do. They can really identify what part is where the pain is, where it's being caused, if it's in the thumb or if it has an issue that stems from further up, because like we know, tendons go all the way up the arm. That's what controls the fingers. It could be a complex thing to diagnose. So I hope the little bit that I gave you about piano playing can get you started in the meantime, at least. Okay, great. We've got many questions. Okay, going over to the next question. June says, hello, June, by the way. June, you say, hello. I got the Hannon Faber book with the gestures. Any recommendations on how often to practice these? Yes, every day. Almost every single one of my students works on Hannon Faber. Even some of the more advanced ones will work on Hannon Faber. But also even really kind of beginner students I have work on it, because the notation might be a little difficult to read right at the beginning, but we can definitely learn them by ear and learn them just looking at the keyboard. Start with the first 3 pages, We want to learn those gestures really, really, really well, to the point where the under wrist circle, that's gesture 1, is completely natural. And when we ascend, it becomes just an innate part of how we practice and how we play. Same thing with the descending over, the over wrist circle. That one is, see, this is the swoop. I think this is the arc. And then the around the corner, which is a combination of the two. Yes. Really, really, really get those first 3 pages. Take them slowly. Work on them every day. Start with 1 page. Work on 1 gesture, because we don't want to confuse too much about, well, which one's up and which one's down. We have to start to program them in. So we do that by feel and with a lot of repetition. Same thing, June, like when you make it a part of your technique practice that you go through daily. And it only takes, if you do each of the exercises that are associated with each gesture on those pages, and you do each of them, let's say twice, at a nice tempo where you can really focus on the movement, that's only going to take you, for 1 page, it's only going to take 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, somewhere in that range. So not a tremendous amount of time. So start with that 1 page, do a couple iterations, a couple repetitions, and then do it every day. And hopefully you're also doing scales and other stuff like that. Yeah, Nancy, scales are good too, but they don't teach nearly as much, and it's not talked about nearly as much with scale practice, movement of the wrist. A lot of times when we practice scales, we're thinking of keeping everything linear and playing in a nice, healthy position, but everything kind of stays stable. Phrasing doesn't really work that way. There might be times in a musical passage that uses a scale that will do more, but usually we don't talk about that with scale practice. It's interesting. So that's why keep on the Hand and Faber for everybody, really. If you don't own the book, Hand and Faber, they're great exercises. They're so much healthier presentation of hand and exercises, where the point of them isn't just to play the notes, but it's really to learn something very specific about how we use the body to play the piano. And the point isn't to play fast, but to go slowly and learn how to use the body. Okay. Rhodesy, you say you got really good news. You're on Spotify, and you met a famous pianist YouTuber in London, Brendan Kavanagh. Very fun, Rhodesy. Very fun. Congratulations. I'm happy for you. You should, send me what is your artist name on Spotify so that we can all look you up. Let's see, Calais. Okay, we're back to Calais' question. Rhodesy said your name, artist name, is Rhodesy Music. Great, awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Let's get you some more followers, Rhodesy. Good. Calais, okay, your question. You said you started at age 4. Why do some piano teachers say that 4 is too young? That is, well, I have a couple of opinions about that. Okay, first let's just talk about using the body and attention span. So usually a really, really young age like that, it can be difficult for a lot of kids to really have the focus to sit and do one thing like that, like play the piano, like work on a specific thing. It can be really difficult to understand and to like really have an idea of what we're working on and why. And that doesn't really happen for quite a number of years later. That's one of the reasons why piano teachers sometimes say 4 years old is too young. We're not going to be able to get enough focus to really make true progress. The second component And there's a big push, and I understand this, there's a big push for really, really young piano students to not have to worry about learning to read notation and to not worry about, seeing music on a page, reading music on a page, but instead only feeling and hearing music. And so a lot of times really young piano students or teachers that teach a lot of really young piano students have started down a path of introducing more music and movement. So music, but away from an instrument. Some dance, some singing, some singing and repeating what they hear, what the student hears, with a particular hand motion that the teacher will make. This is called music learning theory. I can't remember the name of the pedagogue that has really been, spearheaded this approach. I think the last name is Gordon, and it's usually abbreviated MLT. I have a couple friends that are really into this stuff, and they teach a lot of young kids. And so structured time at the piano doesn't start until there's already a really good understanding in the body of rhythm and of pitch. And then, usually when they start at the piano, we start associating what they felt away from it just with what we hear when we play. And later, notation gets introduced. And later, it might only be a year, 2 years, if a student really starts when they're 4 or 3 years old or something like that. So it's not a tremendous amount of time. And I see the value in that because I see a lot of young students get kind of tied to, even older students, get tied to what's on the page, what's in the notation, and then we've never learned how to break away from that or how to really understand that music, we create music when we play. The music doesn't exist on the page alone, right? It's different than going to a gallery to look at great artwork and enjoy it for what it is. And maybe there's a deeper layer if you understand the artist, if you go to a gallery and you understand the inspiration and you understand the story behind a particular work. Maybe there's even more than that. But for us, a lot of times students at piano get sucked into the score and just stuck there, where the notes are kind of the end of the creative process, when really they're barely the beginning of it. Because truly playing music is making something emotional, saying something, telling something to a listener. Even if that listener is just you while you play, it's saying something, putting it out that has a deeper meaning. And that is really hard to do if you're stuck with the notation and you can't break away from it, or you can't, if we can't understand that, not all eighth notes are equal. Any rhythm, right? Not all dynamics are equal. That could open up a whole can of worms for a discussion. Forte in one phrase is not the same as forte in another phrase, right? But we see certain markings on the page. And that's part of the reason why I also encourage my students. Sometimes I use movement and body movement to teach specific concepts. I don't teach a lot of young kids. But even with my adults, I might do some of that if we're having trouble really grasping a concept because playing it is too distracting. There was something else I was going to say, and I forgot. Yeah, Kale, you said you did Suzuki method. Yeah, there's a lot of ear training in Suzuki method. But that's still, even Suzuki, I think, from what I'm familiar with, still puts you right into the instrument right away. But with still an ear approach, which is great. Nancy, you say you got stuck reading the page early and you can't play without it. That's a memorization thing. But it's also, what I'm saying, really, we can be reading the music off the page, but still have a deeper understanding of what it is that's being said. Maybe we could equate it to if you were reading Shakespeare or something. I'm not going to pull any up and do a monologue. But it would be the difference between, reading a paragraph in Shakespeare and reading it without a lot of emotion, without a lot of intention, maybe without a lot of understanding of what's really being said. In Shakespeare, that might be an easy trap to fall into. But then you listen to a great actor present the same paragraph, and it's heart-wrenching. Can be, right? But it's the same words. I think of music notation like words on a page. They're part of telling a story. But what we understand about how those words are used, how the notes are used, make a huge impact in how we can present that art, right? If the thought comes back to me, I'll jump back to that. Whatever it was that I missed. I also started piano lessons when I was 4. I did not have any. I didn't have any issues with it. I do think that kind of grouping all kids and saying that they can't do something is not a great. It's not a great way to shift teaching, because I really feel at all levels that teaching music is a really individual thing. So that's part of the reason when I do these streams, I take questions from each of you, but many times I try to also present a topic or give an answer in a way that can apply to more people. Or I'll circle back around and try to add something that might help it make more sense to someone else, because everybody learns a little differently. And I find that especially true with music. Yeah. I hope that young piano students, young music students, will still in the future have that kind of individual attention, and music lessons won't turn into a lot of group classes away from the instrument. Because I think some kids will definitely be ready to just jump in. They'll have that understanding after a very short time, or they might already have an understanding of what's happening by ear just from living and being around sounds and being around music in daily life. So. Thanks, Nancy. Okay. Let's see. There are a couple questions. David, I think, David, your question about the guy playing Boogie Woogie, Rhodesy can answer that if he didn't already. I think you were talking about the YouTuber that Rhodesy met, David. Miguel, you say, lately I'm not achieving my goals, practice goals, even with the time spent that you would like, and you feel a little overwhelmed. Sure. Let's think about shifting what the goals are in the first place. So, Miguel, I'm not sure. Maybe you can fill me in and fill us in on what is a specific goal that you give yourself during a practice session. While you think about that, Miguel, I'll just list off a couple of these types of things for people. A specific goal might be, I'm going to perfect these 16 measures of this piece in whatever, the next amount of time, the next 20 minutes. I'm going to work on my scales, and I'm going to work on scales for 10 minutes, and I'm going to increase them by 10 beats per minute. Or I'm going to memorize a page of this X Beethoven sonata within so many minutes. Okay, Miguel, you said you will read a certain number of measures. So, Miguel, we're talking about sight reading. Is this like a sight reading goal that you have on a daily basis about doing a certain amount of sight reading regularly? Sarah, by the way, Sarah, I see your question. Thanks for that question. I see your second question. I'm going to go back to your first one when I get there. The second one is, I currently do not have any more slots open for private students. I'm sorry. But if you send me an email, I can definitely put you on a list and, can let you know if a space opens up. Oh, also, Sarah, by the way, I don't think I've seen you here on the channel, but I do offer on these live streams, you can send in a video of your playing, and we all get to enjoy listening to your playing, and then we do a critique. They're totally free. And there are some people that take advantage of that here who have teachers, and some people that are self-taught, and we hear from lots of different people. So Sarah, that's always something that you could take advantage of. So there is a little bit of information in the description about how to do that. Okay, Miguel, you said it's not about sight reading because you're trying to read multiple pieces right now. Okay. Yeah, so Miguel, I would break that into a smaller chunk. So first of all, when we're learning a new piece, Miguel, what is a piece of music that you're learning? Just so we can, there's a big difference between how we're going to chunk up and talk about like a beginner or an intermediate piece and an advanced one. And hopefully, Miguel, hopefully I have it. Or if I don't have exactly what you're working on, I can pull up something that is close to the same style, same technical difficulty. Well, Miguel's answering that. Everybody, what is everybody currently working on? What are you practicing right now? Maybe in thinking through this, and especially if you're working on a new piece, we can learn a little bit better about how to structure our practice. Okay, Chopin's First Ballade, so a Schubert Sonata, Brahms Trio. Okay, big stuff. Miguel, well, I know I've got the Chopin Ballade on here. I think I have one of the Schubert Sonatas on my iPad. You know what? We talk about so much Chopin, but we don't talk about Schubert very often. Let's see. Do I have it? Oh, I don't have it. I have it in a separate score. But maybe we can still talk about Schubert instead of Chopin today. Okay. So, Miguel, I've pulled up Schubert's Second Impromptu. So a similar style. Okay, I'm going to show it on the screen, and let's talk a little bit through how I would go about learning a piece like this. And how I would break things up, and a little bit of goal setting in practice. So here we are. Many of you know this. I have taught this a few times, but I've never really studied it. That is how that goes. I'm sure you recognize that if you listen to a decent amount of classical music. So if I were learning this from scratch, first I would open up the score and I would page through the whole thing. And quickly, I'll do a little bit of marking on here so we can see, but I'd quickly make at least a mental note or a physical note on the score of where, let's do it in some highlighter, where specific things are happening. So at the top, I'm just going to put a yellow. We have an opening theme, repeats. Now, this is very similar again. Okay, so we have a lot of material that is similar. And then we have something different that starts here. That is kind of obvious because of the introduction of more accidentals. So, next page. This secondary movement continues and continues, and then we get back to our main theme there. When we would keep going page after page and just see, okay, the next big change is going to be right down here where we get... Okay. So I would continue doing that for the rest of the piece. We have some nearly 300 measures, but there's a lot of material that's repeated or very similar. That would be the first thing I look for. Secondly, okay, I know I have 300 measures to get through. I would next ask myself, do I have to have this prepared for something in particular, or am I just learning this for fun? And if I have to have it prepared for something in particular, like a recital, a performance, a competition, an exam, right? Any of those things, okay, I have to make sure that my time is really well structured to meet that deadline. So let's say something like that is 6 months away. Hopefully we start a piece like this with that much time ahead of time. And if I say I have that much time, well, let's work backwards. I want to have the whole piece learned, really memorized, everything ready to go within 5 months then. I want to have an entire month that I can practice performing it. Okay, so now I have 5 months to learn the notes and work on interpretation. In the first month, let's break it down maybe even more. In the first week, I would not try to perfect anything further than the opening 24 measures. So the music you can see on the screen right now, this main theme, I would work that nice and slow. I'd work on every aspect, from learning the notes in the first place, reading through it, to making sure my phrasing is good, making sure I'm following the dynamics, my pedaling is good. A week, I would spend a week down to there, those 24 bars. And I would really ask myself and encourage myself to not go further, even though it will be tempting. It'll be tempting about halfway through the learning process to say, oh, well, I can sneak in a couple more measures. Don't do that, because sneaking in a couple more measures can then snowball and lead to, well, now we've read through the entire next page accidentally, and we have gotten to our next main theme that's in yellow, and, oh, well, I know this part. And then we're on the third page. But in doing that, we've lost track of our true goal currently, which is to perfect the first 24 measures. And if we do that, we're going to find a lot of times that the style that the composer is writing in, I like to say the idiom that the composer is using, how they're using the hand in this composition in particular, as well as if you've played other music by the composer. But especially in the composition you're working on, you are going to learn a lot about that piece and how to play the entirety of that piece by working the beginning. Yes, so we don't want to make the mistake of, I think I just saw, yeah, Seth, you just said, I did the opposite and ended up playing a whole piece. Yeah, we don't want to make the mistake of jumping and just trying to assimilate too much information, learn too many notes too fast. And we want this to be broken down in a way where we have enough time on a daily basis to put in the repetitions needed for a couple things, to build the muscle memory, to train the ear, and also just to become so, orally familiar with everything that's happening, not just the melody, but also this counter melody, right? Okay. So Miguel, that's the first thing. Small chunk. I would do that for a week. Then in the next week following that, I would add in the next segment that I put in green, which would be... In the meantime, we might even be able to, depending on how fast you learn, you might be able to memorize it in that time. If we really use our minutes well on this limited amount of music. For a brief moment, I started doing what I was calling practice journals as shorts here on the channel, and I have not kept up with it. I only put 3 of them up. But the plan was to show an incremental progression in learning a completely new piece of music, and I was putting up a Mendelssohn I think it was Opus 19, number 5. Yeah. Something I'd absolutely never played a note of, starting from day one, sight reading. And the one thing that you can see, there's only those 3 videos I put up. I worked on one page. It was about 20 measures. And I worked on that page for a handful of hours over the course of a number of days. And I think after about 3 or 4 days of that little bit of music, I felt ready to go on to the next bit. So then we start the process over again. We learn from scratch. We learn the notes. We start amassing everything. So if we don't have practice goals like that, and our goal instead is, I need to read the entire piece. I need to read all 300 bars, or if we feel like we're pushing up against a deadline, I really have to get halfway through the piece in the next week or something like that. I would still urge you to do that in smaller chunks. So I say smaller chunks because this is a relatively advanced piece. It's 24 measures. The 24 measures we talked about as one small chunk. For a beginner or for an intermediate player, that would be a massive amount of music to learn. For an advanced student, that would be an attainable amount of music to learn in a relatively short period of time. We can micro dissect how to spend, every minute of the week working on those 24 bars, because we would want to do lots of different types of practice in order to make sure that those measures are not getting stale. We're not bored with them. We're always exploring something new. Yes, Dith. We're always exploring something new and different. We're looking for ways to continue to enhance the music. And every time, some of those are going to be technical, some of those are going to be musical. Rob, this question, since it pertains to what we're talking about, you say, how much reviewing do you do on the previous 24 when you move to the next set? That's a great question. The next set, let's say we have 30 minutes a day on one piece. We have 30 minutes to work on the next set of 24 measures. 5 minutes of that I would spend reviewing what I already learned, because I'm going to have gotten it to a point where it is so solid that it's not going to take a lot of time to keep it relatively good. It's not going to stay as good with only 5 minutes a day, but relatively speaking, it's going to stay pretty good while I can focus the remainder of that time on the next set of bars. That is how someone can learn an entire program's worth of music, like 90 minutes of music. And they can do it in, for example, 2 or 3 hours of practice a day. I don't know how many people, did anybody hear the latest, I think it's the latest tone-based video where they talked about Maria Piresh's Mozart debacle, but it was about memory and memorization and a whole lot of other stuff. And in that video, it made me so excited because she said she practices 40 minutes. And the interviewer was so surprised when she said she only practices 40 minutes. And they said, well, do you mean 40 minutes at a time and you do more than that? And she said, sometimes it's 40 minutes. Sometimes I do 40 minutes twice. And I love that, because that is a great example of, if you really know how to structure your practice, you can make tremendous progress in those 40 minutes. She has programs and programs of music, hours and hours, just in her mind and in her fingers. Of course, she's immensely talented too, but yes, if we structure that right, we can still do a lot with a relatively little amount of time. Miguel, you came back to our question. You said, for example, with the first ballade, would you do one chunk per week? That is a little different story, Miguel. The coda is so advanced, so intense. I would practice the coda daily. That would be a chunk. It's just going to take so much work to make it as good as the rest of the piece. So that, if I was going to present that on a program, the coda would get at least 15 minutes a day, maybe 30 minutes a day, just that, just the end. And then I would add to that another chunk of very different writing in that piece. Yeah, yes, Road C. So I would probably pick something lyrical from earlier in the piece and go through the entire section. It doesn't have to be 20 measures, but however long, well, I'll pull it up. So let's say, in addition to the coda, I still have some markings on here from another time. We just say we want to work the beginning. And mostly that is going to be from that measure 5, 6, 7, 8. Yeah, measure 8. And I'll work that until the end. Maybe here. 35. I guess it's approximately 20 measures again. Not exactly. But I would be structuring it based on a musical statement, not necessarily a number of bars. The secondary place you could stop, if that was too much, would be right there, because that's different material. Whoops, and then... That's all different notes than the main theme. Right. Of course we know that. And somewhere in the middle of that practice, I'd add in the opening statement as well. Yeah. Well, hey, Becky. But Road C, I don't really think, when it's advanced repertoire, I don't really think of any music as being harder or less hard than any others. They all have their own unique challenges. And it really depends on what technique is hard for you as the pianist versus something else. Like in previous streams I mentioned, for me, octaves I love playing octaves. They're so great. And so when I was studying the Liszt Sonata, there's a famous passage at the end with octaves in both hands doing completely different things. And it's joked about as the moment that everybody waits for, that the pianist is going to screw up. After 25 minutes of really beautiful music and really, really technical stuff, we get the octaves, and everybody's like, oh, the octaves. And when I got there, when I was performing the piece, I'd be like, yay, the octaves. I don't have to do any more of this like really chromatic, tightly wound stuff in the fingers. I get to just play octaves. And so it was a very different reaction for me. I think everybody would feel that way. So, are thirds harder than other techniques? Yes, for most people they are. But, the coda of the first ballade, there are a lot of pianists with relatively small hands that play the first ballade. And it's much more difficult if you have smaller hands. If you can't reach a 12th, or nearly, we have to do a lot more movement of the arm to execute the same thing. But if you do have a bigger span, that whole thing becomes a study in, dropping and in some rotation and things like that. It's hard. But it's not as hard as if you can't reach it at all to begin with. There are still ways to do it. Like Nancy said, some of us can't reach octaves. Yes. So there would be ways to execute that. It would just take more practice. So Miguel, I hope this discussion has been helpful. Really, if we're frustrated with the progress we're making in practice, the first thing I would always do with a student is go back and assess what you're trying to accomplish on a daily basis. Miguel, you said Barenboim has small hands, but he plays that coda very impressively. Yes, Barenboim can reach a ninth. For a concert pianist, And for especially a male concert pianist, that's a small reach. A ninth is only G to A, and that's his maximum. He plays Liszt too, and Liszt writes tenths all over the place, and he figures out a way to do it. Yeah. So Miguel, go back and think about making a much, much smaller amount of music that you try to tackle, and then tackle that in much greater detail. And I think you'll find that the subsequent music that you end up learning, phrases later in the same pieces that you're working on, they're going to start to be learned faster because of how well you learned the opening or how well you learned the second section. And, you know, much of music is cyclical. Good composition is usually cyclical somehow. We're going to get a repeat of the stuff we learn at the beginning, probably somewhere. And so all that time you put in is going to be worth double when you get to that point. And you're just going to be able to go, oh, I know this. I've already worked really hard. And then it's like we get a bonus of 40 bars or 50 bars or 60 measures later on when we repeat the same material. Feels really good. Oh, gosh. There are so many questions. Love it. I'm not sure if Sarah is still here. But Sarah, if you're still here, Sarah had a question earlier about, said she was working on some Francesco Perino's arrangements and Mozart's Turkish March, but you're finding it hard to memorize more than a page at a time. And any tips for that? Sarah, I would encourage you to practice starting at every phrase. And practice starting at every phrase on page 1, practice starting at every phrase on page 2, and then challenge yourself. Start at those phrases without the score in front of you. That would be the first place I would look to get us away from playing from the beginning of the piece through the end of page 1 and then having a problem later on. We might be thinking too big picture about the music as a whole. Like, we have this piece, we're trying to memorize the whole thing, and we're trying to fit all of it in, and instead, we should be linking together smaller bits of information. So similar to what we just talked with Miguel about. But, you know, a phrase, 4 bars, 8 bars long, memorize that phrase, play that phrase, then memorize starting from the next phrase. And then when we sit down and we play, instead of feeling like, okay, I have to play through 40 measures, no, I'm going to play 4 phrases. And those 4 phrases, I've practiced starting each of them. So I have this great built-in like fail-safe mechanism to make sure that those are going to be right where they need to be. Then our memory only has to be a handful of bars long till we get to our next landmark. And then we go from the landmark, another handful of bars, next landmark. So they all get strung together. That's the first place I would go. And for people, if you already do this, the more that we can dissect the music even further, to the point where can you start on any measure of any piece. If you can do that, really what happens is we're just playing one measure, we memorized it, to the next measure, to the next measure. And our memory starts to work that way, informed by what our ear knows the piece should sound like, maybe a little bit of other harmonic analysis. But speaking purely from a kinesthetic memory perspective, group that into just smaller amounts, smaller chunks of music. We're going to end up remembering those better, and then we get to the next landmark much sooner, and it feels more attainable. So, Sarah, I hope you're still here, and I hope that was helpful. And for others of you that are here, I hope that was helpful for you also. Welcome, Bedlington Gruber. Okay, let's see. Diff, you said you're taking your exam Friday. Well, yes, good luck. Okay, Rhodesy, I see your question. I'll try to come back to that later because you asked for that to be at the end. David, this comment. This, I think you were commenting, you said, David, what do you think of working the chunks from the end to the beginning? And this was in talking about Miguel's practice time. But this applies both to Miguel and to what I just answered from Sarah's question. Yes, absolutely. Practice chunks. When we know more from, I might not always start from the end. I want the end to be influenced by, especially if we're learning the notes for the first time, I want the end to be influenced and the learning of the end to be influenced by the music I've experienced already. So I don't want it to just be some notes that kind of appear out of nowhere. So I would still probably myself learn it from beginning to end first. But then as I'm practicing and as I'm working specific chunks, yes, start from the end. Start with the last chunk and then add one chunk before that and go to the end. That's also a really, really great tool for memorization as well, because oftentimes, like what I just told Miguel to do, we end up starting a lot from the beginning. And when we start a lot from the beginning, and then we go the beginning through a page, and then we go the beginning through 2 pages, well, the beginning gets repeated a lot, and the end doesn't. The end usually needs more repetition. So starting with the end chunks and then adding them up backwards to create the piece is a really, really effective practice strategy. Yeah, Nancy, you said you've been telling yourself forever that you can't memorize anything. Just take it in a small amount. Try 4 measures. If you can memorize 4 measures, you can memorize 1,000 measures. It's no different than the first 4. We just don't want to think about 1,000. We only want to think about 4 at a time. Let's see, OCD King, you said, as a teacher, are there any pieces that you steer students away from simply because you've taught or heard them so much that you're tired of them? No, not yet. I hope that doesn't happen. I mean, I could see if I had, we were just talking about the Chopin's First Ballade. If I had, 2 or 3 students simultaneously working on the same piece, that would, first of all, I would love to have that problem. That would be just a joy. And it would probably take years of having that problem before I'd get tired of it. And if I did get tired of it, then I would, okay, no matter what the piece is, if I've got a string of students all working on the same one, I might try to encourage one instead of learning that right now. Why don't we learn this other thing that'll teach us something similar? But I should ask some of my own teachers about that, because I'm sure that they've been in that kind of position, and I'd be interested to know if they ever felt that way. They sure never showed it in lessons if they did. Yeah. Okay, let's see. Dith, you said big hands can be a problem too. I've got a 14th reach, but because you have larger fingers, it's hard to go between the black keys. Yeah. I don't have that big of a span. I only have a 10th. A 14th. Dith, do you really have a 14th? Because I think Rachmaninoff had a 12th, which is C to G, and I can't come close to that. A 14th would be nearly 2 octaves, Dith. That's huge. Yeah. Dith, maybe you mean a 12th. I think a 12th is more it's not common, but it's more commonly achieved reach. Yes. But I hear you, Dith, about in between the black keys. I have thin fingers, so I don't have that problem, even though I have a relatively large hand span. But it still feels tight to have the hand, the fingers all in one place, like playing Bach and playing Mozart. It doesn't feel as comfortable to play those composers as it does to play Chopin and Liszt. Dith, your span is C to A. That is still impressive. That's a 13th. Wow, I don't know if I've ever met someone that has a hand span that size, so that's very impressive. let's see here. Becky, you said you're starting the Raindrop Prelude. Any thoughts as you get started? Small hands, but it doesn't seem so hard. But 5 flats is not all that familiar. I know I have a good... Oh, here it is. Okay. Becky, can you remind me, because I cannot remember the number, which prelude number Raindrop is. Rhodesy probably knows. Rhodesy is always quoting these back to me. Rhodesy, which number is the Raindrop Prelude? 15. Yep, 15. Okay. I found it almost the same time you did, Rhodesy. Okay. Becky, what is 5 flats? Anybody can answer this. What key is 5 flats? I should say what keys are 5 flats. Don't look it up. We should know this answer. Okay, Dith says D flat. Becky, you say D flat. Good. Correct. Okay, D flat major, Dith, and thank you. B flat minor is the other. That's the relative. Great. So, Becky, first of all, anytime we're working on a new piece, take the key it's written in, practice some scales and arpeggios in that key. Always, always, always. Especially if you haven't played the key very often. So in D flat, learn. If you haven't learned D flat major scale, learn it. If you haven't learned D flat major arpeggio, learn it. Also do the relative, because highly likely the piece is going to transition through the relative minor at some point. And this one does. It doesn't actually modulate to the relative minor, but it hints at it in a couple places. So those will both be important. Then, Becky, that is not the only key that the piece is in. What other key is this prelude in? If you don't have the score, that was going to be a hard question to answer. But it is 4 sharps. Rhodesy, you know your Chopin very well, Rhodesy. Yes, so Rhodesy says C sharp minor, yes. So measure 28 of the Raindrop Prelude goes into C sharp minor. Nancy, that's another key to be practicing. Scales and arpeggios. So now we have 3. We have to know those 3. And I would really highly suggest working through those in your technical practice before you dive into the repertoire. Just a couple minutes, 10 minutes a day. Okay, secondly, Becky, I'll just reiterate what I told Miguel, but maybe take your chunks in, make them even smaller. So the first phrase. Sorry, I have never played this piece. That's measure 8, Becky. I wouldn't go any further than that as you start. And I'd start also, as you're learning the piece, practice just the melody by itself and hearing a good phrase, hopefully using the fingers that you'll have to use as you learn the rest of the piece. So I'm following, I'll put it up on the screen. I'm following some finger substitutions that are marked in my score. So 4. So practice just the melody. Practice the harmony with the accompaniment and where the right hand plays. Hear that for itself. Also, maybe do a little bit of practice of just the left hand. If we aren't very familiar with these skips around, and playing gently with fifth finger. Yeah. Okay, I was adding the right hand in just for context, but you could just do left hand through there. And spend some good amount of time just on the first phrase. Don't get too overwhelmed working through this. Let that come in time. Don't worry about exactly where those notes line up. Because the problem with that practice, I think a lot of people actually fall into this trap. If we have a difficult rhythm or there's a polyrhythm to execute, we get preoccupied with where exactly does that note go? Well, let's do that again. That one. Where exactly does it go? And how does it fit in this group of 7? And we can end up doing a lot of very slow practice. But that's very unmusical. And now we end up practicing, for the sake of a rhythm, we end up practicing this, which has no shape, it has no phrase. We have articulated that with the fingers over and over and over and over again. We've programmed that muscle memory. When it comes time to actually want to make the phrase, it's not going to turn out very nicely. But what's going to happen is that's what you've practiced by going. So what I would do instead, we can do a tiny bit of that to recognize exactly how the left hand fits, but don't get carried away. And instead, learn to feel the pulse of the quarter note. So 1, 2, down, 2, 3, and 4, carrying us all the way across. So we want to feel the large pulse. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. Because then we feel that gesture, and it can have its own shape, and it can have its own sense of rubato. Yes? And it can be done many different ways. And we can experience those ways if we feel one beat. That's why I'm snapping for 1 and then 1. Yes? So don't spend some time doing that. And if you need to, in the meantime, if you want to feel that while you play the left hand so that it's just not without harmony at all, when you're practicing feeling a good sense of phrase and gesture here, only leave out that note for the time being. So okay, then we're training our ear to hear this as one really nice gesture without getting preoccupied about how the polyrhythm fits together. Once in a while, go back and make sure that we have those are some tips for the beginning, Becky. Let's see, you have another question here. So you said, how do you feel about improvising with it? I have mixed feelings about that. Mixed feelings because Oh, thanks, OCD King. I appreciate that. Thank you very much. Um, Becky, I would hold off working on improv until we have the notes of the piece in particular, until we have them under our fingers pretty well. I think improv can help us take something that we know a bit of already and can help unlock some new places to go beyond that. So I think it can be really valuable. I think learning to improv in D flat, learning the chords that work together, learning to improv a melody over a similar style accompanimental figure. Great. But don't do it right away. I wouldn't do it right away. Experience what Chopin wrote first, learn it, get it in our fingers, and then when we feel like, okay, it's time to take the next step, it's time to really work on inflection and really work on what I'm trying to say with this piece and what each phrase means, because now playing it is more automatic, then throw in some improv and say, okay, well, let's feel D flat. Let's feel what different chords in D flat do. And can we use some of the chords, some of the harmony that Chopin used in our own improv? And then what color does that give the tone? And how do we experience that when we're not looking at the page, we're not playing someone else's notes, but we're playing our notes, our music? And I think we'll find that you might have more of a similar reaction to what Chopin would have had about certain harmony when we hear it for ourselves in context of our own playing. Even those simple little things are going to start to sound different. They're going to carry a different meaning for us when we've experienced that through improv. And that can really help enlighten you about where further to go with your interpretation. But I say that, put that toward the end, because I don't want to confuse the hands about what they need to do to play the piece correctly. Yeah. Rotze, you said, Chopin's best music wasn't written down, so that must mean it was improv. Chopin was a master improviser. He improvised all the time. It's highly likely that for much of Chopin's repertoire, the record that we have of it, the single score that we have, was just one of many iterations that Chopin himself would have played of that music. So yes, I think there's a really great value in learning to improvise, and I wish that it was taught more often. I wish it was taught in a classical sense more often. Usually these days, you most often hear improvising happening in jazz, and jazz players being taught to do that and understand harmony and our technique and how technique bridges that gap. Technical warm-ups like scales, modes, arpeggios, etc. Knowing all that stuff and how it works its way into improv, in addition to knowing harmony, harmonic structure, etc. So, yeah, secondarily to improv, because improv requires such a great grasp of all of that already in order to be able to do it. The other option, if that is too intimidating for people, or if it's too intense, or you're not going to be able to get past a measure or two because it's just crazy, start to compose something in the style of what you're working on. It'll be pre-composed. You'll have plenty of time to think about what you want to do in every single bar. It'll still be your music, and you'll still have to dive into similar ideas. You'll still have to dive into why does the music I'm modeling mine on modulate in a certain way? Why are certain harmonies used? What color do they give? What if the registration is changed? And when we pre-compose, we have time to ask ourselves all of those questions, and they don't have to just be right there on our fingertips, ready to go. Oh, OCD King. I did see your question and I did not answer it, but thank you for reminding me. Yes, Becky, I hope we're going to move on, but I hope that that is helpful. Small groups, different parts of the texture. Don't get too obsessed with the polyrhythm. Feel phrase. Be musical, feel the long phrase, and work on the technically challenging parts, which are truly going to be like quiet articulation of all of that left hand stuff consistently. Yeah. Okay. OCD King, you asked, are there aftermarket pedals for digital pianos that better mimic acoustic? That depends. I have two answers to that question. Okay, great. You said you already upgraded from the plastic little wedge type pedal to the built-in 3-pedal unit, but it's still very different. You have probably reached the pinnacle of digital pedals, OCD King. Most of the 3-pedal units are going to be built very similarly. The damper, the pedal that simulates the damper pedal, has a potentiometer in it so that it measures the travel of the pedal. Usually the other two do not. They're either on or off, which also doesn't fully mimic an acoustic. It only really mimics the sostenuto pedal, which is truly on or off on an acoustic grand. But the soft pedal, the unicorda, is also, there are shades of unicorda on a grand that no digitals simulate yet. Anyway. The damper pedal, so if you have one that allows for half pedaling or fractional pedaling, that is the closest we're going to get. And you've already upgraded that. It probably allows for that. I can't imagine a 3-pedal unit. Those are kind of pricey. They can be from different manufacturers. You have to choose one that works with your keyboard. You can't just mix and match different brands with different keyboards. They don't all work together. So sorry, not Dith, OCD King. I think you probably have already reached the point where you have experienced the best digital pedal. The biggest thing that I think is missing is a feedback from the vibration of the instrument through the foot, and really a feel of a damper pedal on a piano has a pretty great amount of resistance because we're moving something physical. Quite a bit of physical stuff in the piano. And that is replicated probably with springs on a digital pedal. But it still doesn't feel the same. And we don't get that sensation through the foot of the vibration of the instrument traveling through the pedal. So unfortunately, I don't think there's a better solution. The only other place you might look, OCD King, is if the samples on the keyboard you're playing do not allow for half pedaling or fractional pedaling, you can upgrade that by using a computer, using a sample library, triggering that, wearing headphones or having speakers. So that would be using MIDI, either a MIDI cable or a USB cable that transmits MIDI data to your computer. Then we're going to use the same components. We'll use your keyboard, we'll use your pedal, but they are going to feel like they respond very differently depending on the library that you're using. And in those cases, yes, we might be able to get a better feel if the library is really well programmed for half pedaling, and we truly do have maybe 3 or 4 points along the travel of the pedal that the library does different things. That might be the next best representation of working on an acoustic instrument. It's still not, an infinite number of gradations. Usually pedals have like 4. On most digital, really nice digital libraries have 4. But for the vast majority of people, 4 is more than enough. It only becomes a problem if you want to do some really advanced flutter pedal where on a grand you would be just, putting the dampers right on the strings and lifting them back and forth real fast. That's not ever, at least on the current digital products, that's not going to work. OCD King, sorry I missed your question. So you might check out those virtual libraries and see what you think. Most of the time you can demo them for free. At least the light version of them you can demo for free, so you can try something out before you buy it and see if it actually works, makes a difference. And then you could structure your practice using one of those virtual instruments with your keyboard. Yeah, Nancy, you said you have an M gear pedal. That's a big step up from the little plastic thing that came with your keyboard. Yes. Yeah, I actually, after 15 years, something like 15, 16 years of having my Kawai digital. The pedal that came with it finally went kaput on me. And every time I'd move the damper pedal, it would trigger a full damper release and then a quick depression. So every time I would move the pedal, it would do something like bum, 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 bum with the pedal, and it was unplayable. So I actually just had to buy a new pedal, and I tried out a couple different kinds. Yeah. I ended up having to reorder the same thing that came with the keyboard because none of the other ones worked right. So anyway, Rosie, you play on your digital at home a lot. You might consider getting a nicer pedal. Nancy, you say you want to get a Roland, but you don't know which one. There are so many reviews online you can look at, Nancy. I don't know the names of all the models off the top of my head, but for the most part, I usually recommend people to start at about $800 for a keyboard, and then depending on your budget, go up from there. It's really, really tough to find a keyboard with a decent action for less than that. There might be one or two models. Okay, I see, Miguel, I see your question. What is my favorite brand for acoustic pianos? I'll open this up to everybody too. Everybody, feel free to drop in the chat. What is your favorite brand to play on? Maybe it's something you've played in a concert. Maybe it's a piano that you own. Something, that you've played in a recital space or at school or... Great. Dith, you say you love your Kawai. Nice. Calais is Yamaha. Good. Same country, very different products. Becky says Yamaha digital, not acoustic. See, Nancy, your second piano is a 19th century Steinway upright. Miguel has a Steinway. Miguel, what model Steinway do you have? David likes his Yamaha. Cool. My favorite brand. I have two. My favorite brand to play on is almost always Mason and Hamlin. I love their 6.4, the Model AA, the 7-foot, the Model BB, and the 9.4, the Model CC. Yeah, just really, really fantastic pianos. And I love really how well they stay in tune. They resonate like much bigger instruments than their size compared to other brands. And also, especially the new ones that utilize all the carbon fiber components, actions stay regulated really, really well. For years on end, they'd need little to no work to really be maintained at concert level. I love that. Zen of Zen, you said Kawai and Mason and Hamlin. Nice. My second favorite are Steinway, Hamburg Steinways. I have not played anything other than a Model D on a Hamburg Steinway, but each of those that I've played, I have absolutely loved. Miguel, okay. Miguel, it's probably either in the 6 range or the 7 range, but beautiful, beautiful. Is it Gigi Shalou? Hello, I hope I didn't completely butcher your name. Welcome. You ask, are there any exercises you recommend for playing arpeggios quickly? You do rhythmic exercises, repeat the notes around the thumb, but any other recommendations? Oh, wait, is that Jenny? I just saw the end of your comment. Okay. Arpeggios, faster arpeggios. Let's see. And you said repeat notes around the thumb. Jenny, do you play when you work arpeggios, let's work D flat, since we were just in D flat. Wow. I haven't practiced that in a long time. Great. Jenny, do you work to the note past the thumb cross? Is that what you mean by repeat notes around the thumb? Or are you talking about doing that and then something like that? You said yes. You play 4 octaves. So when you play, do you go very quickly one note past the thumb cross? Like that. So I'm playing D flat starting on 2 instead of on 1, 2, 1, up to there. And pause, and then to the next one. Miguel, I did not read the question before. Favorite piano question. I did not see it. Okay, Jenny, try pausing. We can push this, the tempo faster to that point and then pause. So, just what I've been doing here. Pause. 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 You could start lower if you want to. With this one, you could even also leave out the cross before the thumb plays. So start the first one that way and then just go. It's basically creating a rhythmic grouping. But the important spot is that it's the note right after the big shift of the hand. Pausing gives us time to regroup and then execute the next one just as well. Over time in practice, we can work the pause out so it doesn't happen anymore. Other rhythmic groups, if you're already doing those are great. The other thing to try is to make sure that we practice arpeggios in 2 distinctly different ways with finger articulation. I'm going to go back to not D flat. Miguel, I will come back to that. That's a great question, and I'll talk a little bit about that. Let's go to D major, and a lot of times when we think about practicing arpeggios, we're thinking about doing it with complete finger legato, so with no pedal. And when we do that, when we move, for example, from this A and we tuck to play D, the hand is really contorted. It has to be to make that tuck happen. And if we hold those 2 notes down and I turn the hand over, the thumb is really far underneath the hand to make that happen. That's important. It's important to develop that. But it's only half of the puzzle. It's only 50%. Because in order to play arpeggios very quickly, we can't allow, well, you could see it from this side, we can't have the elbow fly out for every thumb tuck. We don't have time for that. We also don't have time to push the thumb all the way under the hand like that, playing at a really fast tempo. Which means the second way that people rarely teach to practice arpeggios is to let go and let the hand travel to the next note. So without the pedal, there's a little gap. It's not finger legato. Okay, we want to practice doing that and try to build speed without doing a thumb tuck under the hand. If we can practice both of those things separately and distinctly, then when we want to put them together and play very quickly, we're going to end up utilizing both. Because no longer are we, when we want to play faster, no longer are we going to let the elbow fly out to facilitate the thumb moving under the hand, which is what happens there There's a lot of motion. And motion, too much motion, is the enemy of speed and building speed. But instead, we're going to utilize both. The thumb is going to move a little bit under the hand, but the hand is also going to jump and move as we go. We need to be very sure that when we practice the jumping, that we don't land or smack or accent the note after the jump. The articulation of all of the pitches should be exactly the same, no matter what speed we play, right? And if you want to hear the connection that we are purposely eliminating from the fingers, just put the pedal down. Make sure those are all even, same articulation, right? When you do practice finger legato, don't use the pedal so we can hear if we're truly legato. Then when you incorporate both, I usually put the pedal down. And we're trying to allow the best components of each of those to come through in our playing. So a little bit of motion to the right with the arm and not the chicken wing. And a little bit of the thumb tuck. And working them both together, we're going to get to the next position faster, and we're going to get there in alignment. Like Miguel said, the arm movement should be straight, horizontal, like a horizontal line. Yes, we should strive to keep, I call that in alignment. And as we play up the keyboard, we should strive to keep this in the same perpendicular orientation to the keys. Yes, avoid the chicken dance. That's right. Because as soon as the elbow, you can't see the elbow on the screen right now, but as soon as the elbow flies out, look at what happens. Our entire hand is out of position to play anything, really. And that is usually what prevents most people from building great speed, is because as you do this, then the hand has to get back in position and it snaps back. And usually we create a big accent, or we miss the note completely because there's excessive motion in the wrong place. Yeah. Hello, Antonio. Jenny, right? It was Jenny. Thank you for the question, Jenny. And hope to see you again on a stream. Welcome if this is your first time. Yeah, Rhodesy, it would be a book. I've been doing these for what, 2.5 years? Okay, so Miguel's question that I had missed before. What's one piece that you've performed that you find really challenging? One of my favorites that is not known very well, and I haven't played it in years at this point, so I probably can't demo a whole lot of it for you, but I'm going to put some of it on the screen just so you can see what we're talking about. Yeah, Rhodesy, Twinkle Twinkle. This is the Sonata by Paul Arant. I did record it on an album in 2011, so long ago. And I've played it live a number of times. I played it in competition as well. This is just the first 2 pages. The entire piece is 60, 70 pages long. And it continues to just be crazy the whole time. So that is my answer. Miguel? More challenging, I think, even more challenging than the Liszt Sonata, because there are a lot of different themes, and there's a lot of time spent with the hand really stretched out. The composer had big hands, like Death. I think the composer could reach a 12th. And so some of the big stretches that are in here were just easy for him. and for most other people, they're not. And there aren't really opportunities to let the hand relax. And Miguel, Paul Laurent only wrote 4 works. He wrote this, actually, Paul was a concert pianist in the 1970s, mostly in the United States. He had about a 10-year concertizing career. He was in a bad car accident that forced him to stop playing. But while he was concertizing, he was unhappy with most of the pieces that were written as program closers. Like the Liszt Sonata is one, that a lot of times people will end a program with a solo piano program with the Liszt Sonata. Or maybe Schumann's Carnival, they'll play the whole set. Or the Rachmaninoff Second Sonata. There are some other ones that fit the bill to do that. And he found the problem with a lot of them, and the one that I remember talking to him about in particular, was that they end kind of soft. Like the Liszt Sonata just ends with... It's not a big ending that gets people riled up, to like give you that standing ovation. So he wanted something that would take people and like take them on this incredible journey for about 30 minutes where they would feel like they had to jump out of their seat when it ended, because the ending is so full of excitement. I had this up on the screen. I just lost the page. Yeah. This isn't the end. But this is a good example of some of the writing where, like I said, it just stays stretched out the entire time. Starting from the top of the page. I don't know if I'll be able to read much of this. That was bar 179. And there are even little things, and they're buried throughout this whole piece, like a little counter melody here that's on the top of that. Oh, and I can't actually reach that, but he could. That first chord, which is what, an 11th? Yes. Huge piece. Yes, Miguel. Let me play. Let's see if I can play a little bit of the beginning. It's been a long time. Well, that's the first page. I missed some notes in there, but muscle memory came back a little bit. But yeah, it does that. It has, ups and downs. I think it's a lovely piece, but even the more introspective moments are just massive, and there's a lot of notes to play through. So, yeah, I have a lot of good memories playing the piece and a lot of very stressful memories. And if you do want to hear a full recording, I have it's on Spotify. I have a recording of it on Spotify. You can find me playing it live from some almost 20 years ago on YouTube on my other channel. It's not a perfect performance. It was actually the first performance I gave of the piece that I have out there on YouTube. So, yeah. And maybe, go take a listen. There is one other pianist currently performing the piece and touring with it. Her name is Daria Robotkina, and she is just starting as a professor at the Cincinnati Conservatory of Music this semester. And she's been playing it for maybe the last 5 years, 10 years, and plays it a couple times a year around in various performances. So if you have a chance to hear her, I've not heard her play it live, but I have watched a performance of her online, and it's very good. Dith, you said I had a lot more hair back then. I did. This isn't because I'm losing it, it's because I'm cutting it shorter. Oh, Miguel, just the tough questions. Well, a composer that I don't like or that I don't connect with, I don't know if I currently have one that I would say that about. Yeah, I don't think there is a composer that currently that I feel that I don't connect with, or that I don't like. But when I was younger, I just had an incredibly hard time performing and learning music by Bach. It was like it was always the most, I felt like it was always the most challenging thing to play well on a program. And because most recital programs, but student recital programs at least, they progress in chronological order. And so at the beginning of a program, you're always the most nervous. And then I would have to walk out and play Bach, which I felt like was the most exposed and that I enjoyed the least on the entire program. And it was a match that did not work out very well. And I have definitely given some not wonderful performances of Bach preludes and fugues at the beginning of programs when I was a student. And then for a while, after that time, when I could really choose the program that I wanted and that I wanted to perform, I would just shy away from putting Bach on it in the first place. So if I needed to start with a classical sonata or something like that, I'd start with Mozart or Beethoven instead. And I would just skip Bach, or it would be an all-romantic program or something like that. And those were great. But all that to say, I really have come full circle where, I really find Bach's music beautiful now and extremely engaging. And it's the challenges are so unique. After exploring so much big romantic repertoire, going back and playing Bach, the technique is, I don't want to say easy, but it's the notes are not hard in and of themselves to play. There is a little bit of of the hand needing to work really close together, and some, I think, unique finger choices that happen in Bach that you don't see with other composers. But that is no longer, I used to think that was what made Bach so hard, was, everything, and it's got to be just right. And I feel really differently now. Like, the notes are quite easy to play. Musically, interpreting it is still very difficult. And I don't expect that to change for my life, in my lifetime. Yeah. So that partially answers your question, Miguel. But our friend Bachward's Fellow, it may or may not be here. I haven't seen him on the chat today, but yeah, I always think of him thinking about Bach. And many times I think about the very first full-length professional recital program I played when I was 16. And it started with how does that go? I think that's number 3 of the Well-Tempered Clavier. Bachward's Fellow's here. I think it was C-sharp major, the Prelude and Fugue. That's the piece I opened my first full-length program with, and I have a recording of it, and it was just a disaster. So it's unlikely that I'll ever post that unless I'm looking to, make other people feel a lot better about their piano. Oh gosh, Nancy, you said, have you ever played Schoenberg? I've played one piece by Schoenberg, and it was I actually don't remember what it was, but it was for a dance recital, and it was a 2-piano piece, and I think it was written specifically for 2 pianos, and it wasn't a reduction. It was an interesting learning experience. And the your Polini comment about shirts, sleeves, and arm guards, that's funny. Z Spark. Hello, Z Spark, if I didn't get to say hello to you. Miguel, I'm probably not going to have a chance to talk about the French suite today, but you should definitely, if you'd like to send something in, please send a pre-recording in. I had mentioned to Rhodesy, if Rhodesy is still here, I'm going to need to see your question again, because I skipped his, because he asked me to answer it at the end of the session. And we are definitely at the end of the session. So let me answer Z Spark's question and Jenny's, and we'll go from there. Miguel, Miguel, either let's start with that next time, or feel free to send in a recording to talk about. So Z-Spark said, what is the biggest thing you see beginners and early intermediate players forgetting to practice that you think is really important? I think it's less of a forgetting to, it's kind of a forgetting to do something, but not in the way that you might think. The most common problem I see is a lack of mindfulness in practice. And that actually pertains to beginners and intermediate players, and even beyond that. It happens less often as you get more advanced and as students get more advanced. But crazily enough, there are still people that don't understand, that play at a really high level, that don't understand how to practice mindfully, practice with intention. And it goes back, this is kind of coming full circle because of my comment about Maria Pires earlier from the video that was just on tone-based, where she said 40 minutes a day sometimes an hour and a half a day, sometimes a little longer. But, and then you talk to other people and they're like, you have to practice 6 hours or 8 hours a day if you're going to make progress, or if you're going to, have a chance at learning anything. And that's not true. And most often I find that people that have to practice 6, 8, 10 hours a day, especially at the professional level, it's because they're doing something wrong in their practice in the first place. There's nothing, if you have accomplished that sort of technique, you've built that sort of technique, there is nothing that should really take you that long. You need that many hours for every day. So bringing that back down to a beginner and intermediate level, what does mindful practice look like? It is, one, not putting things on loop where you just play the same thing and you play it over and over and over again, and you don't pause, you just repeat, and the repeat has no meaning. It's like, or the repeat's meaning, to the full extent of its meaning, is just to play it again. That is not a good use of time. We should always have a really specific reason why we're repeating something. Those reasons, I couldn't even come close to listing them here. You could write a notebook full of reasons why you'd take a repeat in practice. And everything from technique to a specific way the hand is working, to musicality, to phrase, to pedal work, to choosing whether to use the unicorda or not, or choosing how much of a shade to use or not, or practicing in rhythms, or practicing different tempi, or practicing pushing your tempo beyond performance, or practicing playing something extremely slowly because it works as some completely different muscle. The list could go on, and I think a lot of earlier students don't even realize all of the things that are possible to think about. So that's one of my It's like one of my missions as a teacher with all of my students, and hopefully here as well for all of you, to just show the tremendous amount that can be thought about on a note-by-note basis. We need to do that at a professional level. You need to think about all of those things. And I find, we're going to come to Antonio and Bachward's fellow, their comments in just a second. But that's why I find if you're taking hours and hours to practice a piece or like a couple pages of a piece, there's probably not enough variety in your practice. It is probably too full of just mindless repetition where it just happens over and over and over and over and over again. And I try to kind of nip that as fast as possible with students that are more, earlier in their journey, because it's not going to take you very far. And it's a really easy trap to fall into, where it's also the old way of practicing. That was what was encouraged by teachers for a long time. You sit down and you start something, and then you don't get up, you don't work, you don't move on to the next measure, you don't move to the next phrase until you play it right. We have found with neuroscience, that's not the way the brain works. It's not the way the brain learns. Very likely, if you sit and you dump information in that is so limited, like a phrase, and you dump it in for an hour, what's going to come out the next day is going to be mostly garbage. You are going to have learned very little considering all of the time that you spent. So, going to what Bachward's fellow just said, best practice is not more than 20 or 30 minutes at a time in order to stay mindful. I think that is really, really good advice. And I think if you are really accomplished at knowing how to focus at the instrument and stay completely engaged with what you're doing, you can push that number further to 40 minutes, 45 minutes, on occasion an hour, but definitely not longer than that. Definitely not longer than that. And I would encourage earlier piano students to do exactly what Bachward's fellow said. 20 or 30 minutes at a time, take a break. At least, a break could be 5 minutes. That's all it has to be. But take the break. And whatever it is that you were working on, stop and move to something else. I feel like I've been on both sides of that. In my own practice when I was younger, I learned a great deal about how to practice mindfully early, but I also have forgotten it many times. And there was an occasion I was at a music festival, and every day of the festival we had a lesson with one of the faculty. It was a different faculty member every day. And so the whole rest of the day until the evening was usually practice time. And there was a room for everybody that was at the festival. So you never had to wait for a practice room. You could just go practice. One day, I had a practice room that was above one of the teachers' teaching studios. It was on the floor above it. And you could hear, I didn't realize, but you could hear through the floors. I couldn't hear what they were working on, but they could hear me. And I sat and practiced that Rachmaninoff Etude Tableau for like 6 hours. And I ended up seeing that teacher the next day, and they said, "What were you doing for 6 hours? Like, why did you spend all of that time?" And they weren't frustrated with me. They were smiling when they said it. But it was like, you could have been way more productive with that practice time. So I have been guilty of the same thing. I'm very aware of that. Nancy, what your comment, you said you used to mark the number of repetitions in your journal. Now you're starting to mark start and stop times, marking in breaks. That's great. Yeah, that's great. Antonio, you said Valentina Lisitsa says she practices 10 to 12 hours a day. Do you think that is possible? Sure, that is possible when she's not touring. If she's on tour and she's got to travel, she's not getting 10 to 12 hours a day in practice. But if she's home or she has an extended period staying somewhere with the piano, then sure, that's possible. Personally, I don't agree with spending that much time. There are stories of that, and for all the reasons I just went through. Obviously, it works for her. She's a very fine pianist. She's very consistent. I would wonder if she only got 4 hours a day to practice instead of 12. Would we be able to hear the difference? That's what I'd wonder. Because in my experience, I actually was talking to someone else about this maybe a month ago. There was one occasion in my practicing life that I tried to do 8 hours a day for a week. And I did it. I learned quite a bit of repertoire. But the biggest thing that I learned was that hours 6, 7, and 8 were a complete waste of my time because I was so tired out. I couldn't focus on anything I was working on. I was just going through the motions. And if I'd glimpse like, oh, I felt really good about that one bar, how I played that one bar, amid a whole bunch of run-throughs. So I really learned hours 6, 7, 8, just not good. And because I was already using the hours earlier so well and I was so focused, right? I also found that hour 5 was not very productive. It wasn't a complete waste, but it was not very productive. And so I learned about my own self that if I cap my practice at 4 hours a day, I'm going to be the most productive. I'm going to take my breaks. I'm going to have things scheduled out really nicely. I'm going to move around to repertoire. Rarely have I even needed that much time a day to prepare a full recital. Most of the time I'm doing it in 2 to 2.5. 2 to 2.5 hours a day, 7 days a week, every day. If I have more than one program where it's, more than 80 minutes or 90 minutes to learn, if it's 2 or 3 programs, when the few occasions that's happened for me, I need more time and I'll need the 4 hours a day for sure. But if it's just one and I'm performing one multiple times, 2 to 2.5 for me is great. I get a lot done and I'm not worn out. I feel refreshed. I look forward to coming back the next day and I'm not dreading it. And I can still get some other things done during the day that I need to. Z-Spark, you said you have a hard time playing for longer than 30 minutes because you wait till your kids to go to bed. Yeah, that is tough. That is really tough. And that's a difficult thing about being an adult piano student. There's not a lot of time to fit it in the first place. And for everybody that feels that way, we want to be really sure that the time you do have, 30 minutes, an hour, that we use it as best as we possibly can. So going back to the initial question, that is the thing that usually frustrates me the most as a teacher and that I try to work on the most with students is being more mindful that every repetition matters, and it matters in a really specific way. And the more specific we can hone in exactly what the intention is of each repetition, the more productive we're going to be during our practice. And I don't think that is something that needs to be limited to professional artists. I think that's something that everybody can learn from. And I don't think it has to take away the enjoyment of practice and the enjoyment of playing either. I just think that, personally, I think, the sooner you're able to play something well, isn't that more enjoyable than hammering something away and not making a lot of progress at it? I don't know, food for thought. Antonio said, pro athletes take naps between practice to consolidate muscle memory. I do think that would work for piano. If you can get yourself to sleep, if you can do that, sure. I do think that would work. Bachman's Fellow mentioned Joseph Hoffman's book. I have not read that one, but I'm familiar with it. I really just should go read it. I actually just ordered a book. I wish I could remember the title. I'll probably do a review of it on the channel. but it is about the neuroscience of practicing, and it was just recently written, maybe 5 years ago, by a professor at the New England Conservatory. And I'm looking forward to diving in and seeing what else there is to learn that I don't yet know about. Yeah. Zero. Hello, Zero. Gosh, we really need to wrap up. And Rhodesy, I know I did not get to your question. It was about a Chopin waltz. I remember that. Gosh. Rhodesy, are you going to be able to send a recording of it in for us? Because I would love to hear you play it and give you some comments. I really think that would be the best way to work on, unless it's a really simple question about like a fingering choice or something like that. Rhodesy, it doesn't matter if it's not good. It's learning. Think of it like going to a lesson. You know, you're just going to play a little bit of it. It doesn't have to be the whole thing. Just play a little bit of it for us. Yeah. If you were good every time you went to a piano lesson, you wouldn't have to have lessons, right? All right. I think we're going to wrap up. Rhodesy, please send me something. Miguel, also, please send me if you have a question about the Bach. I think it was the French suite you said, one of them that you were working on. Please send that. Everybody else, thank you so much for being here. If you haven't hit the thumbs up button, please hit the thumbs up button. It really helps out. If you have hit the thumbs up button already, if you hit it again, it takes it away. That's not good. Yes, so please give a like if you can. Thanks, David. Thanks, everybody, for being here. It's good to see many old friends and a number of new people. And Zero, yes, please. Zero, absolutely. We chatted in a comment, I think, about Chopin's Nocturne. Please send that in also. I'd love to work with you on it. Woo! The next stream. Oh, I can announce that. The next stream is not next week. It is September 11th. I can't believe it's September. September already. And it is the day before my birthday. So the next stream, I'll either be really happy or really sad. We'll see how it goes. All right, everybody. Thanks so much again for being here. It was a pleasure to talk about all kinds of different things with you. And I'll look forward to seeing many of you next time. So remember, we start at, we've been on for 2 hours. So if you were jumping in late, we started 2 hours ago, whatever that time is for you. And we'll be starting at that time in 2 weeks on September 11th. All right. Take care, everybody. Practice smarter, not harder. And hopefully I'll see you in the next stream or on the next 2 videos on the channel. Check those out this Friday and next Friday. All right, everybody. Bye-bye.